reaching for the mic that I don't ever use anyway. Hi guys, take the glasses off to talk. Want to say thanks to everybody for coming out. It's a little bit better weather than we had the last time around. I brought a blizzard with me last time I came, and we still managed to get quite a decent crowd in. We had a fire going, and Laura was incredibly hospitable. And as last time, we now have cookies. Anybody here who is not familiar with the series? Oh, one person. Good, you give me an excuse to talk. We always love that. Excellent. Am I audible? Because we're going to be reading it pretty much this volume. Everybody here fine? Mm-hmm. Great. Basically speaking, in the first book, we meet the characters, the human characters that we're going to be seeing down the line through the series. Rupert Lane, nicknamed Ringin, which is a good old Scots nickname, who is a folk musician, lives in the UK, and discovers early on in his career that playing traditional music for a living, not so much unless you're, a superstar, which you don't become right away. Like most other musicians in the UK, he's got a university background in something else, which helps you pay the rent. His case happens to be period property restoration, and he consults with the National Trust and various, on-call for property owners who want to bring their property back to the way it was. In the first book, he is stiffed for a fee, not out of malice, but the gentleman in Glastonbury whose manor he's restored has gotten himself into a bit of a cash crunch, and he's offered a cottage instead, just a life leasehold on his cottage on the Scots estate near Glastonbury. And not being an idiot, he says, free rent, own cottage, plus a little tithe barn on the property. Yeah, takes it, discovers that not only the cottage but the barn are both haunted within a day of being there. And he and his girlfriend, who does not live with him, these are two people in their late 30s, his girlfriend Penny is a theatrical producer. She has her own troupe. She specializes in certain period drama, and she travels a lot. They don't live in the same house. She lives in London. She comes down and discovers that she's fairly sensitive to this stuff and doesn't much like it. He likes it even less than she does, and they basically need to find out who these people were and how the hell to get rid of them so he can have his house back, which they do. The second book is The Famous Flower of Serving Men, which is basically Penny's story. She, I say, is a theatrical producer, and to lead you into this one, she inherits a piece of property from a very eccentric French aunt who, this will please Jilly, I think, who has just died on her 90th birthday, celebrating her 90th birthday in a golf club in Edinburgh with some of the local talent, and fell down a flight of stairs and broke her neck. She was just quite an amazing and wonderful old lady, and she left her niece, by marriage, a theater in EC4, which is an older section of London. It's not West End, it's not prime theater territory, but it has a lot of Victorian playhouses and a lot of restored smaller. You couldn't have done the big dramas there, for instance, in the 19th century. There were licensing laws in London that prohibited theaters that weren't actually, licensed by the Crown from doing things like Shakespeare, but they would have had comedy and vaudeville. And she has left Penny this theater and enough money to restore it, and a very enigmatic letter. And we're going to read, I also want to introduce Juliana Egley, who a lot of you know, who came in from Minneapolis, and I'm going to read two parts of a prologue, which happens 25 years before Penny inherits the theater, and 600 years after the events that lead to what is now happening in the theater. Just to give you a sense of what is going on there and what they're about to deal with. And I will then read that's very short, it's just the prologue, and then I'm just going to read a short chapter section in which Penny and the senior actor in her troupe, David Harkin, have a little encounter of their own in the theater, which is called the Bellefield, and that's Bellefield, and it's important as the book goes on. And Juliana is going to be the voice of our ghost. So we will get to that momentarily, but we will start out with the prologue. And everybody can hear just fine? Am I going too fast for anyone? Good. All right. On a raw January night in 1979, a homeless man and a small dog wandered into a nameless alley off Bouverie Street in the city and prepared to set up sleeping quarters. It was brutally cold. Europe was seeing one of its worst winter seasons in half a century, and Londoners were currently miserable, dealing with iced-over streets and an incessant windy downpour of sleet that needled the skin and made safe walking an impossibility. Few people willingly came outdoors in this weather, but the homeless man, a beggar of many years' standing, had no choice in the matter. He surveyed his chosen refuge with a practiced eye. The north side of the alley offered the most shelter. There were 2 doors in the long wall of whatever this building was. One that looked like a loading dock, with old-fashioned pocket doors, and one just a normal door a few feet away. The loading dock had a bit of an overhang, cutting back on the wind and the sleet. The dog sat at his feet, patient and obedient, shivering. The homeless man piled his bits of cardboard and tattered cloth atop a sheet of plastic he'd found behind a warehouse near London Bridge. The plastic would keep the damp out. He curled up, whistled for the dog, made room for the little terrier to curl up beside him, and pulled an old battered sleeping bag around them both. The dog, grateful but used to this ritual, snuggled close. Bloody Margaret Thatcher. The man spoke aloud, also a nightly ritual. His eyes were almost shut. The dog listened, or perhaps not. Things get worse when you put the Tories in. We could rot here. You think they'd care? Not bloody likely. This time the dog answered him. The man opened one eye. What in hell? Against his side, warm under the pile, the dog had gone rigid. His master had a sudden clear vision of the animal, legs planted, short coat bristling, teeth bared, glaring at something twisted and ugly and wrong. Someone was whispering. The man lay very still, listening himself, both eyes wide and staring at a faded, filthy pattern of red and black plaid that was the lining of his sleeping bag. Someone was there. Someone had come. Someone was whispering. Why couldn't he understand a word of it? And why was he afraid to look outside the safety of his blanket? The dog began to whine. It was loud, much too loud, muffled by the warmth of the man and the pile of cloth and the stifling reek of a sudden inexplicable fear that the man could neither articulate nor control. He lay listening to a dark alien rasp that sounded like the hissing of an adder. He'd never been so frightened in his life. The whines became a howl. There was a scrabbling, a kick, and then the terrier bolted, exploding out into the alley, howling and barking as it went. "Oi, come back here!" The man was on his feet. His fear of whatever was whispering, unseen in the darkness, momentarily swallowed by the greater terror of losing his only companion. He peered into the sleety night. Something was wrong with his eyes. There were street lamps out on Bouverie Place, but he could see nothing but odd shapes. Was that mist blocking his vision? Winter mist come up from the River Thames? He smelled it suddenly. Smoke, a pungent reek of burning that was tainted with something darker. In his mind, as clear as his mental picture of the dog growling and bristling, he saw people in wooden houses, the houses burning, the people trapped and screaming, no way out, no way down, and only death waiting. He began to cough, to choke, his eyes watering. Someone whispered, counterpointing the screams of those trapped. Out in Bouverie Street, the dog whimpered. With shaking, uncoordinated hands, the homeless man retrieved his belongings. It was hard to move. His feet felt leaden and slow, and he'd never been so afraid. But all he possessed was there. Without this pile, he'd be half frozen to death before the break of day. He couldn't simply abandon it. He dragged the pile clear of the alley, listening to the noises become part of the shadows and fade out behind him. The dog ran to him and sat, pressing up against his legs. They moved away, the man muttering under his breath. He wasn't aware of his own speech, and would have been very surprised indeed had he realized he was praying. So that gives you the setting, just what it is that Penny and her guys are about to deal with.